assault, we can use the subway's main line to get Winter's underground...
Hello and welcome to the family platforming. We're back with more family platforming. None of that solo platforming nonsense. That reminds me, from here on, the long toss mechanic will now be referred to as the bro throw, as was suggested by David from my YouTube comments. I know he has the last name. It starts with W, but that's not important right now. His name is now David from my YouTube comments, so everyone please thank David from my YouTube comments. As for the actual level, this is one of the harder fight segments in the game, though nothing compared to the ones Raphael goes through. This one's hard because, well, you know, the limited amount of space you're given to fight. Thankfully, there is a wind-up before the enemies attack, even if it's not a big wind-up. The strategy we use to deal with these guys hasn't really changed. You just gotta be slightly more scared. Do the same thing you've always been doing, hop away, and then use the homing attack, just be slightly more scared this time. And then after you get the family attack, start using that instead, because it's just kind of objectively better, especially in a small area like this, where it's much easier to juggle the enemies with Mikey's family attack. Even though I really don't think it makes any goddamn sense, I like the blue lights coming out of the subway train. It's very aesthetically pleasing. So the idea behind this level is that Donatello thinks they can use an underground passage to get to Winter's Towers and its underground parking. But he fucks it up and gets lost, which makes Raphael really pissed. And it's not a bad idea for a level, honestly. Essentially, this level's just a big loop. They head into the subway passage to try and find Winter's parking lot, and then they just end up going back to the sewer without having gained anything from the experience. Except for several near-death combat encounters, I guess. I guess they gained some of those. Leo also mentions that they should be careful because they have no idea what kind of crazy stuff could go down with all these monsters running loose in the city. But we've only seen one monster, and we'll only ever see one monster. So even though when I first played this level, I was Raphael, don't yell, I'm trying to do commentary. Anyway, because Leo explicitly says they should watch out for monsters, I anticipated that this level would have a monster in it for us to fight, but it doesn't. And you know, it's okay, there's only so much budget. You only have so much budget to work with. I understand you can't include a ton of boss fights, and you probably don't want to in a game like this. This isn't a game where boss fights are really a highlight of the experience. The boss fights aren't god-awful, but they're certainly not fun or anything. I mean, the boss fights could just not be here, and I think it would still be fine. Maybe the game would be improved if there were no boss fights in it, actually. This is a situation where I wonder if they only included the boss fights out of obligation, or if they genuinely wanted to include them. Because the boss fights, like I said, aren't horrible or anything. But they don't seem to fit well with the rest of the design, not even the combat design, because the combat design is mostly focused on fighting multiple enemies. Also, I wonder what it is with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and beat-em-up mechanics, because almost every Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game is a beat-em-up. There are a couple 2D platformers, but most of them are beat-em-ups.
It's the foot! You know what they do! Let me show you! Nunchucks are all yours. That's a pump and a drag. Get out, dude. Salacious. That's a pump and a drag. Yeah.
So I think I've said already that I really like the idea behind this level narratively, but at the same time it doesn't really work with the game mechanics, which are meant to aid the narrative, but generally don't in this game. You know, it would be fine if this game weren't trying to tie the game mechanics into the narrative. That's fine. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody can handle that. But this game did try to do it, and it failed. So the reason it failed in this particular circumstance is because the idea behind this level narratively is that Raphael doesn't want to be here, but he's forced to be here with his brothers out of obligation. Raphael would much rather be fighting Winters directly. He doesn't want to be here, and that's why he's bitching constantly. But if you remember the family trust game mechanics, then you know that Raphael can just leave at any time. In fact, he's not actually here right now, in spite of him constantly complaining. The dissonance between game mechanics and narrative, that happens frequently in almost every video game, but in this specific circumstance, it's much worse than normal. Raphael's meter isn't even full, so he's not here to bitch, and even when he does get here to bitch, then he can just as easily leave if we goof up. So, the game itself is working against the idea the level is trying to present. I don't know how you do that, how you don't see that when you're making the game. No, I'm not going to be arrogant enough to assume that the story was written first or that the gameplay came first. You know, I can't know that. But one of them had to give for the sake of the other in this case. And since it's the purpose of the game mechanics in this game specifically to fit with the narrative and its themes, the game mechanics are probably what should have given. The game mechanics should have removed the trust meter mechanic for at least this level specifically, if not several others where it's equally moronic. Or the game mechanics could stay intact and this game could just be changed to have nothing to do with TMNT. That would also work, as I proposed several times. There's also an idea that one of my commenters posed that it would still be possible to fit the game mechanics in the narrative if the narrative was not simply trying to retell the movie. Now, I'm not saying that Ubisoft could have fixed this. I'm not saying this is a problem they realistically or physically could have fixed, because I don't know what restraints they were working under. But regardless of whether a flaw can realistically be fixed, I still have to point it out. Flaws exist independently of the developer's intentions. If they didn't, then most games would probably be great. Then again, there is also the incredibly unlikely possibility that what we're seeing here just is the developer's intentions exactly. That rarely, if ever, happens, especially with licensed games, but there's still the very slim possibility that this is just exactly how the developers wanted the game to turn out. Really, this is all just hypothesizing. Trying to build any kind of argument on this would be ridiculous. All I can say is that the flaws exist, regardless of why they exist exactly, what caused them to be there. I can be relatively certain that the developer was trying to tie the themes into the game mechanics and vice versa, because interviews suggest that. Anyway, here's another really cool 2D platforming segment. It doesn't have as many tricks to it as the previous one, but it does mess with perspective a bit, and I quite like that. It's just a fun section in general. Looks aesthetically pleasing, too. It's worth noting that at this point, the Turtles have completely given up on actually going to Winter's parking garage, and now they're just trying to find their way back home because they got so hopelessly lost. So hopelessly fucking lost. And I can only assume the reason Raphael isn't bitching is because he's so angry that it has driven him to silence, or he had an aneurysm. This level's thankfully surprisingly light on combat. Again, the combat is better in levels like this where you have all four turtles, but it's still not great. It's still pretty mindless and dull. Anyway, we're on a train now in a beat-em-up / platformer, so you know what that means, right? Because we're on a train.
Weapons out. You ready, big guy?